big week for Ukraine-related news. President-elect Trump has made it clear he wants that war to end. Now, how that happens is going to be up for debate, but the three-year-old war appears to have taken a very dangerous turn this week.
To review, President Biden lifted the restriction against Ukraine firing US-made missiles into Russia. Once the US did that, Russian President Vladimir Putin fired back verbally with lowering the threshold to use nuclear weapons. And earlier today, the US shut down the American embassy in Kyiv and told staff to hunker down in anticipation of a major attack on the Ukrainian capital. Fox News correspondent Trey Yingst sat down with Volodymyr Zelensky this morning.
He will be sworn into office on January 20th. He has promised during his campaign to end the war in Ukraine on day one. Do you think that's possible?
God bless if it's possible.
But I think that still it was a kind of an expression, a figure of expression. He meant that he can quickly stop the war. And we will not push President Trump as if you said that you can end the war in one day. I said that it is very hard to do that with Putin. But the wish itself that he can end the war and end Putin quickly, and I think that he is capable of doing that.
So I was glad to see Zelensky there saying that he hopes it could be accomplished that quickly. That's a very optimistic goal, so maybe it can't be. Donald Trump has not been very specific on what he will do to facilitate the end, but he does seem or appear to have a better relationship with Vladimir Putin than President Joe Biden did, although even so, President Putin, I believe, said nicer things about Biden than about Trump, but maybe that was a kind of four-dimensional chess. Who knows?
Who knows?
Trump is committed to bringing this war to an end. I'm glad about that. We've seen a dangerous escalation, I would argue, in the last few days, as Joe Biden has authorized for the first time U.S.-backed long-range missiles attacks into Russia itself. I think the argument by people who support that is we want to put Ukraine in a better negotiating position. We had on Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis yesterday to dispute that it will put them in a better bargaining position, and indeed Russia has responded by saying this is akin to bringing NATO into a war against Russia, and we are prepared to use nuclear weapons to defend ourselves in all-out war with the rest of the West, which is very dangerous and very concerning because we want to de-escalate this war rather than ramp it up. Ukraine cannot defeat Russia. They can hold on to their territory. They've done an admirable job of that. They are the victims. They were wrongly invaded by a evil regime. I have no problems calling Putin that, but we have to live in the real world. We cannot continue to, I would argue, to just support Ukraine to the last man as the country hemorrhages its populace. I saw a poll yesterday, I believe for the first time, a poll of Ukrainians, for the first time, a majority saying they favor a peace deal with Russia. So even that argument that, well, the Ukrainians want to fight, so why wouldn't we help them? We don't have to command our troops. They want to fight. Shouldn't we support them? That argument now holds less water to me because a majority of the Ukrainians say enough is enough. We want peace.
In relation to what you said about living in the real world, I agree that we have to do that. The unfortunate thing about the real world in any aspect is often you have to choose between least bad options, or what is the least bad option. And I just think that all the options here are pretty bad because any negotiated peace that enables Putin to claim victory is bad because it emboldens him. It suggests that the West was not able to deter him from grabbing some land at least. The alternative is also bad, which is to fund Ukraine endlessly to fight with uncertain chances at best of repelling the Russian invasion. Now, you mentioned that I think the intention behind this issue about the long-range missiles is to enable Ukraine to hold some Russian territory that it has actually captured, thus giving it a stronger negotiating hand. In theory, I don't think that's a terrible idea. I just think that there is a risk of escalation and there has to be a definite exit strategy, and what is that going to be? On the Ukrainian poll, the danger oftentimes in conflicts, not just specifically this one, is everybody wants peace, right? I mean, most people who are not sociopaths want peace rather than war.
Sure.
But what are the conditions that you believe are necessary to come to peace, to settle for peace?
Sure, and it's going to be uncomfortable, but in order to have peace, both sides are going to have to feel like they got something. So what I imagine this looks like, and I'm no expert in the geopolitics of this region, is that some of that easternmost portion of Ukraine that from the get-go had a large Russian-speaking population of people who feel themselves as culturally Russian and felt more attachment to Russia, either ideally would vote on whether they want to stay part of Ukraine or get independence or be part of Russia. Again, ideally, but ideal is not going to happen. So maybe that just becomes part of Russia, and people who live there who don't want to be under the Russian government get to have an opportunity to leave and move further to the west. And then the rest of Ukraine gets a promise that they are part of NATO, or that it's a promise on paper, so Russia understands you go any further, we are committed to defending them, so you can't do that. And thus, we make sure there isn't a kind of slippery slope where they say, well, we got this, now we'll see where we can go next. I absolutely agree, we have to stop that from happening, but I think what I believe is that the most cost-effective way to get that result, where Ukraine is not just the next domino and there's another domino and there's another domino, is they get that and then they understand that any further, now you are stepping on NATO territory and we will defend it, and you can't do that.
Yeah, look, I think a lot of Americans do want Ukraine pressured or induced to accept some kind of territorial loss as the price for peace. I do think that in that scenario, it is really vital that a commitment or guarantee of Ukraine's future security is really watertight and is a credible one. Because remember, it was during the Obama presidency when Putin annexed, territory and essentially got away with it. Then if we're going to say, well, he did invade Ukraine, that was bad, and we'll have to settle it somehow, he'll get some more territory, then he's just, slicing bits off the cake of other nations' territory, and that's not really acceptable.
No, we should put an end to that. And by I say we should put an end to that, I still think our European peer countries who are proximate to Russia are the ones primarily responsible for that. I don't think we should be the world policeman, but we have alliances and we've committed to defend our allies, and I think our allies, and Donald Trump agrees with this, should shoulder more of the financial responsibility for dealing with matters in their own backyards. But look, I mean, there's certain hawkish, neoconservative, neoliberal people who think Putin is just an utter madman, an utter crazy person who is going to make war on the rest of the world if he really feels like it. That seems not totally plausible to me. I think he's definitely a bad man. I'm not saying nice things about him, but we I think have to believe we can reason with him on some level that he doesn't want to go to war with the rest of the world, that he felt maybe wrong, you could say it was wrong of him to feel this way, but felt that the uncertain state of Ukraine was a hazard for Russia, and now we're going to have to settle that once and for all in a way that probably makes us not thrilled, Ukraine not thrilled, but I agree with you, absolutely stops Russia from gobbling up more and more territory, and ultimately preserves lives. Because the question is, how many people are you willing to let die on both sides of this conflict in order to achieve the objective of not having Ukraine lose a single inch of land, or single whatever the Ukrainian measure is.
Yeah.
And if the Ukrainians aren't even willing to do that anymore, then I think it becomes, okay, let's wind this down.
So, I mean, in relation to reasoning with Putin, one of the tools of reasoning with him is to raise the price as high as we possibly can for any future incursions or invasion of anywhere else. And in relation to Ukraine, it is true that there is a greater ethnically or culturally Russian population in the east of the country. It's also true that it is a sovereign nation that was invaded by a much more powerful neighbour, and that we don't approve of more powerful neighbours invading sovereign nations.
True, that's true.
So,
but I agree with that, but it would be weird to take the position that you can't have an ethnic group. I mean, the borders of Europe are not sacred. They've been redrawn a trillion times, sometimes by the U.S., sometimes us and the victors saying, okay, Now the Austrian Empire doesn't exist anymore. Now it's all these different enclaves of ethnic groups. I mean, the history of this region is conquest and expansion and retreat and kings getting together and saying, now you're part of this country, now you're part of this country, now you're part of this country, often contrary to the wishes of the people. If there's a will of a subset, I mean, I would take the position that they should separate. I don't have any...
Yeah, but if it's a position of a subset and they want to, and as currently members of the Ukrainian nation, they want to have a referendum on whether to secede from Ukraine and join Russia, and they have a free vote, and that's okay. But that's surely politically and morally and ethically different from a foreign army marching in and saying, well, these are our guys and we're going to have that now.
Well, if they say that contrary to the wills of the people, but I don't know, if people say we want to be part of that country, I don't know, this does get tricky. Obviously, if I said the people in my apartment complex and we vote, we don't want to be part of the U.S. anymore, everyone's going to laugh at us, so no, but it does, I mean, there's a mechanism in our Constitution, right, for... West Virginia was created from, during the secession movement of the Confederacy, a subset of Virginia said, we actually want to stay part of the Union, and that's how that state was broken into.
I know, but I mean, we don't generally think that fair votes can be held under the eye of an occupying army. Right? I mean, that is not the condition for a fair vote.
A free and fair, the ideal case would be a free and fair election or referendum for the people of that region to decide which of the three options I laid out. That would be what we would like to happen in an ideal world.
The Robby Soave referendum.
The Robby Soave referendum on a region of Ukraine I know very little about. More coming up on Rising right after this. Stay with us.